stories by giving the stories to people who take them and give them again. In the circle of tellers, the circle of listeners, who become the tellers of stories that circle the heart like old friends.
This is a story from Slovakia. Marushka was a beautiful young woman. She was as beautiful on the inside as she was on the out. She was patient and kind. You see, when she was a small child, her parents loved her, and they brought her up to know that she was a worthwhile person, and she knew that she was loved, even when her mother died, even when her father remarried, even when her father died. She lived with her stepmother and her stepsister Helena. They were not kind to Marushka, but her disposition was such that she went about her days with a light and airy attitude, because she knew that she had been loved. And Marushka, she cleaned the house, she did the chores, whatever her stepsister and stepmother could come up with for her. And one day her stepsister, in the middle of winter, said, "Oh, I would love to have some violets." Her stepmother said, "Marushka, go find some violets for your stepsister." She said, "It's the middle of winter. Go and do not come back without some violets." And so Marushka left the house in the cold and the snow, and she began to wander through the woods, not knowing how she might find violets in winter. It got dark, and she got deeper into the woods. She saw a light in front of her, and as she approached it, there was a fire, and there were 12 old men, long beards, standing around the fire. And she stepped forward and she said, "May I warm myself by your fire?" An old man, January, said, "Come in, my child." And she went in and she warmed herself by the fire, all of the months of the year surrounding her. And old man January said, "What brings you to the fire?" And she said, My mother, stepmother, and my stepsister would like some violets." And old man January said, "Brother April, would you make some violets?" And it was as though the sun rose and the air warmed. There was a cool breeze, and suddenly there were violets. And she picked them, and he said, "Quickly now." And she picked them up, and she filled her apron. And as quickly as the sun had come, it went again. And she left that circle, and she went home, and she knocked on the door, and her stepmother opened it, and out spilled all the violets from her apron. It was wonderful. Well, the next morning, Helena said, "Oh, I long for strawberry." And of course, the stepmother said, "Go and find strawberries." And so, once again, she went out into the woods and she searched. And as night came, she saw the fire. Again, she approached those 12 men standing around the fire and said, "May I warm myself?" And old man January said, "What brings you back, my child?" And she said, "I'm looking for strawberries." And old man January said, "Brother June, would you bring some strawberries?" And the sun came out, and the air became warm, and there were strawberries. And she picked as many as she could, and she put them into her apron, and she took them home. And her stepmother and her stepsister ate them all. The next morning, her stepsister Helena said, "Oh, I'd love to have an apple." And so her stepmother sent her out for the third time. She wandered again to that fire and into that circle, asking if she could warm herself. And old man January said, "What brings you to the fire?" And she said, "I need apples." And he said, Brother September, and Brother September grows a tree, and 2 apples fell from the tree, and she grabbed those up quickly, and as quickly as she grabbed them, the tree went away, and the fire was back, and she left that circle. And she went home, and when she showed the 2 apples, well, her stepmother and her stepsister ate both of them and wanted more, and she said, have no more. Well, her stepsister wouldn't believe that. She said, I'll find the apples. And she went out. Helena went out into the forest, and she was walking through that forest, and she saw the same light, and she saw the same fire with the 12 men standing around it, but she did not ask. Nay, I warmed myself at the fire. She barged in, and she stood by the fire until she warmed herself, and she looked around and said, what are you old men doing here? And she was rude, and she didn't pay attention. And she left that circle without any apples, and she wandered on. And when she did not return, the stepmother went out searching for her daughter, and she also found the circle, and she also burst through the circle and warmed herself by the fire and then moved on. Marushka knew that she had been loved. She was a beautiful young woman, and one day a young man came, and as far as we know, they live happily in that same village to this day. And that's Dan Keddy's story of Strawberries in Winter.
We keep the stories by giving the stories to people who take them and give them again. In the circle of tellers, the circle of listeners, who become the tellers of stories that circle the heart like old friends.